We're going to be talking about AI again today. There is so much happening just in the last 6 weeks. We've had a pivoting moment where Anthropic released their latest LLM, large language model, called Claude Opus 4.6, which may go down in history as the moment where AI became autonomous, agentic, as opposed to reactive. And that seems to be changing everything as we speak. And I think we need to start thinking about what that really means in the longer term and the near term, in fact, but particularly in the longer term, in terms of what people are talking about in terms of how human labor may be displaced, augmented, what it means in the longer term in terms of a potentially post-human economy. I'm not saying we're going to get there, but we need to consider these things, or certainly a part version of them, and prepare ourselves. So I've put together some slides, and I'll share those now in terms of some thoughts on that. And a post-human economy question mark. If AI replaces human intelligence and robotics replace human labor, what happens to output, prices, work, and money itself? So let's see if we can work through this. And the framing is us going from narrow AI, which is what we've currently got now, really, task-specific tools, image recognition, etc., to general AI, where AI matches human cognitive breadth, to superior AI or artificial superintelligence, ASI, where AI exceeds human intelligence in all domains, and ultimately robotics come alongside, and the humanoid robots are inhabited by artificial general intelligence or artificial superintelligence, AGI or ASI, and your humanoid robot knows clearly more than you would or I would. And as those robotics scale, which really we're talking 2027, 2028, again, that changes the human manual labor equation as well. So think about what that could mean for jobs generally, either displaced or augmented or stay the same. I've had a stab at this. Initial high impact and high routine jobs, high cognitive, not low cognitive, high cognitive, low physical, things like data entry and processing, customer service agents, paralegals, radiologists, junior financial analysts in my particular world, content moderators, basic coding, we're seeing that already, travel agents, potentially. That's where AI will, or could potentially, replace the current jobs done by humans, which are very computer-based and very data-based. Middle column there, augmented, where AI accelerates, but human judgment remains important. Surgeons, complex medicine, senior lawyers and judges, architects, urban planners, teachers, certainly for the time being, therapists, scientists and researchers for the time being, senior engineers, CEOs, maybe CIOs as well, if I'm lucky, strategic leaders, and journalists and editors. And then those more manual tasks, which will likely stay more human, certainly for the time being, until robots really come along. Carers and social workers, plumbers, electricians, childcare, early education, emergency responders. That makes sense. Clergy, counsellors, artists and performers, politicians and diplomats, and community leaders. So that's the way I would categorize it. And let's just see how that will have an impact on us as humans, the potential human cost of transition. Well, firstly, an identity crisis. For many of us, work defines purpose, certainly for some of us, status and status in the community as a whole. Mass displacement doesn't just remove income, it removes identity. And that can be very difficult for people to cope with. Widening inequality. The ownership of AI systems could concentrate amongst the very few, whilst those I've just mentioned will face unemployment, certainly in the near term, and widening inequality as a result. Generational fracture. We're already seeing for the younger workers trying to enter the workplace, or potential workers, we're seeing those job openings for the more junior posts falling away quite rapidly now. That's very worrying for the early 20s, mid-20s into 30. And then mental health is not mentioned very much, but clearly the implication of this for people's well-being can be quite severe, and that's going to become a feature, I think. Historical parallels on the right there. The Industrial Revolution is, I guess, the most obvious one. 1760 to 1840, 1850, maybe a touch later. 80 to 100 years to displace a lot of agricultural labor. There was mass poverty, there were riots, there was social unrest. Very difficult time, but it took place over a century, not over a decade. Manufacturing offshoring, more recent example, particularly in the States and parts of Europe, where a lot of manufacturing moved to Asia. That did lead to a lot of the polarization we're seeing today and the inequality we're seeing today and the tensions that resulted from that. And then AI displacement, 2025, 2026 to 2030, 2035, 5 to 10 years, potentially less, and massive cognitive and physical disruption simultaneously. There's no precedent for this in terms of the speed and the impact it may have. How could the authorities react? How could governments react to this? At the moment, kind of in denial, in delay, kind of sort of trying to ignore it. AI treated as a productivity pool as opposed to a displacement threat. We're going to see a rush of regulation, I suspect, soon to try and protect the labour force from the impact of AI. That'll come in the next year or so. And then I suspect we'll get more social spending, potentially money printing as well, to offset the effect of unemployment coming through. Universal basic income or universal high income, UHI. That'll come through, I suspect, in terms of distributed social welfare. And then ultimately some form of proper structural reform in the early 2030s, a fundamental rethink of the social contract, new definitions of contribution, ownership and entitlement. And political instability drives urgency. There's a real question as to whether governments really can keep up with the pace of change, and whether the governance structure thereby can endure through this disruption. And while that's happening, we're transitioning, governments are trying to react. Ultimately, we'll get to the point where potentially, and again, this is one scenario, where human labor does get displaced on a mass basis, and you get AI replacing human intelligence and robotics replacing human labor. Those are the two components of any economy, human intellect and human labor. If they get displaced by AI and robotics, then your biological constraints are removed and your level of output explodes. And so your GDP can go up 5-fold, 10-fold, 100-fold. No biological bottlenecks. AI systems don't sleep, robotics don't sleep, they don't require breaks or holidays, they don't require any lighting in their factories. Even dark factories are being set up in China right now, inhabited entirely by robots who work around the clock. Compounding self-improvement, AI improves the tools that improve AI. Progress curves become exponential, potentially instantaneous. We're starting to see that in terms of the progress of these models coming out now, as we're living through today, a version of this digital singularity. And as that output explodes, then because there's so much supply, then the cost of that supply starts to collapse. And the marginal cost of information goods, certainly digital goods, falls close to zero. We're already seeing that in our digital world in terms of what we have to pay for and what we don't have to pay for. We don't have to pay for very much these days. Physical goods, as robotics come in 2027, 2028, physical goods start replicating very fast. The robots start to build themselves. And the price of physical goods starts to fall as well. So you've got a collapse in pricing. And then ultimately a post-scarcity economics model emerges. The study of economics is the allocation of scarce resources based on human inputs. Remove human inputs and remove any constraints, and your economic model has to change fundamentally in terms of what an economy is capable of. So what happens to pricing? As I said, a lot of prices fall to near zero for many things. Software and digital goods, information and content near zero. Most manufactured goods collapse in price. Food production collapses as robotics and AI take on the agriculture sector. Medical diagnostics falls precipitously, as is education. Education will probably go close to zero, I suspect. And education will be supplied on a mass basis at extremely high quality to everyone at a very, very low price. which will have its own implications in terms of bringing people into the workforce, if that still remains in place. And then rising prices. These would fall into the goods which remain scarce, and I'll cover that in a second, but briefly, prime land, or most forms of land, human experiences, energy will certainly go up a lot, because these AI systems are very energy hungry and data hungry. Critical minerals and rare earths, because they are the components which make robots, as well as the AI in the data centers. Human relationships would become valuable, more valuable, and high-end luxury goods potentially could become more valuable, or certainly priced higher. So a big bifurcation in pricing levels, but mostly prices go down a lot, aside from those things which remain scarce. So what resources will remain scarce? When labor is no longer the binding constraint, but scarcity doesn't necessarily disappear. It migrates. Scarcity migrates as opposed to disappearing. And these are four categories I would highlight. Number one, energy. We've talked about that. It's the primary input for AI and robotics. Electricity demand scales massively in this world until energy and data centers move to space, and that constraint is removed. And there's an enormous amount of energy available in space in terms of solar energy, and that constraint will ultimately be removed. But that's a little bit further down the line. But in the meantime, energy will remain scarce. Raw materials, again, until we start mining on the moon and on meteorites, raw materials for the air and robotics will remain scarce by definition. Land, again, if one owns land, as one's likely to own a house, etc., then those will remain by definition scarce goods because there's only so many of them. So prime land and land generally becomes more valuable, I suspect. And human attention, human experience and social connection become premium goods outside of this digital world. And I think we're going to see a lot of move back, if you like, to that level of organic, non-digital interaction. So what happens to money in this world of age of abundance, this world of abundance? Does money become irrelevant? I suspect to a large extent it probably does. But I've sketched out some scenarios here anyway in terms of potential outcomes. So money could persist but transform into something quite different. So money evolves from a measure of labor, which is what it is today, to a measure of resource rights, those things which remain scarce: energy, land, attention tokens, data. So the function of money continues, but the substance changes. We could get a radical devaluation where money becomes changed into a voucher system, into an AI-managed credit allocation. That's a world where AI produces everything and distribution is managed centrally. So conventional money becomes redundant in that sense. And traditional money becomes meaningless in large parts of society. Well, the risk is that money concentrates in very, very few hands. And it'll be the hands who actually own the means of production, which is the provision of AI and the provision of robotics. That is a very, very small number of people. And that's extreme inequality and would lead to, I suspect, social disorder in that form of an unequal world. But broadly, I suspect money becomes potentially meaningless in this age of abundance. And what do we humans do? If machines do the work, what defines human purpose? Well, a leisure society. Humans are freed from the necessity of labor. This is quite hard to imagine because a big reason for work today is earning money so we can live and have a leisure life and have a family life. Aside from the purpose of work, one does it, many people do it for the money. And if that is removed, then there's no necessity to work, and humans are freed to do other potentially more interesting things. So the quality of life becomes divorced from economic contribution. So a purpose economy on the right there, meaning seeking replaces income seeking, art, relationships, philosophy, exploration, family, nature, religion. Potentially more meaningful, a more meaningful purpose to life than simply seeking money through work. UHI and redistribution, so the AI productivity gets taxed. So the AI output effectively gets taxed and redistributed, and we receive dividends from machine output. That could be no augmented function. And then a potentially separate ownership class, as I mentioned before. The gains get concentrated within the very small number of people who own that means of production, the AI and the robotics. A very uncomfortable outcome, I suspect, for most people. So a very different world to think about. And as I've said, I'm not saying this is the outcome, but it is a potential scenario or a version of it. And we need to start thinking along these lines to get ready for what's coming our way. So to conclude, there's a central tension here. Technology creates this abundance. The political outcome determines distribution of that abundance. But the post-human economy would become an engineering problem that becomes a governance crisis. Who owns the machines? Who determines who captures the gains from AI productivity? How is that output redistributed? Is it universal high income? Is it some other form of tokens or vouchers? Is it market forces? Who decides that? What defines human value? If it's not work, then what is it? What defines identity in the social contract? What defines social hierarchies, if there are any hierarchies anymore? And can institutions adapt fast enough? Be it governments or nation states. I suspect that the pace of AI advancement will outrun the capacity of democratic systems to govern it. And that has profound implications in terms of how this new world gets governed. Will nation states survive? Will democracy survive? So fairly heavy philosophical questions. I've sketched out, if you like, an extreme version of it, but we do need to think, as I said, about some version of this or of the pathway to it. It is coming our way very quickly now, and it'll be a healthy debate to have to talk more about this and navigate the journey towards it, because it's going to have profound effects on all of us. I hope that was helpful. See you next time. Bye-bye.